Hello everyone. I can't do it. Hello everyone. It's too cheesy. I can't. Hello everyone. In this video we will learn how to use a tool named Handlebars. Or in other words, we will learn how to take a bit of raw JSON data like this and turn it into neatly formatted HTML content that looks like this. Now you might be thinking, hey, isn't this exactly what we did just like 1 or 2 videos ago? Well, yes, but this time we are going to use Handlebars, and we'll find out that Handlebars can do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So with Handlebars, we don't need to manually write our own for each loops, and we don't need to awkwardly concatenate an HTML string together bit by bit. Okay, so we can avoid all of that tedious work, because Handlebars provides a super easy way to create HTML templates based on JSON data. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so behind the scenes, I just removed all of the Handlebars related JavaScript from the page. So now I just have a bare bones HTML file, and you can follow along with me from this point. So in the description for this video, you'll find a link either to my website or to CodePen, and you can use that link to copy and paste all of this HTML, all of the CSS that I've added, and most importantly, my starter JavaScript code. So feel free to pause the video and find that link so you can follow along with me. But if I take a look at this JavaScript code that I've included, we see that I've got the Ajax code that we wrote together just a video or 2 ago in our JSON and Ajax lesson. And I do want to point out that this current video won't make much sense unless you're already familiar with JSON. So if you haven't already, I recommend you watch my JSON and Ajax video first, and then continue on with this current video. Alright, but moving on, this code is going to go out and fetch the JSON data that lives at this URL. Okay, and if that request is successful, then this code will run. So I'm just saving the JSON data that I retrieved to a new variable named data, and then I'm logging that out to the console. Okay, so if I check out my browser and refresh and check the console, as expected, here's an object with an array named pets, and within it there are 3 objects. The first one is a cat named purrs loud. The second object is a dog named barks a lot. You get the idea. So my code is just visiting this URL. It's downloading this JSON and storing it within a variable that I named data. Okay, so we're on the same page right now. We've got the same code. Now let's get to work. So we don't really want to log this data out to the console. Instead, what we actually want to do is create HTML based on this data. So to stay organized, why don't we do this? Down at the bottom, let's create a brand new empty function. We can name it anything we'd like, but I will name my function create HTML. And for now, in the body of this function, let's just log out a test to the console. So console log testing from our function. Alright, and then if our Ajax request is successful, so within this area, let's actually call this new function. So instead of logging out our data to the console, let's call our brand new create HTML function. And most importantly, within these parentheses, let's pass it the data, the JSON that we retrieved from this URL. Okay, so now down within our create HTML function, within these parentheses, we can add a parameter. We can name it anything we'd like. I'll name it pets data. And then we can use this name within the body of this function to access that JSON data. So underneath this testing line, we can also say console.log pets data. All right, so if I save this and refresh the browser, testing from our function and then the JSON data. Okay, perfect. So this means that our function is working correctly. We have access to the data that we need. This means that now we can actually get down to the entire point of this video, and that is learning how to use Handlebars. So the first thing we need to do is include the Handlebars package in our page. That means we need to go download Handlebars. So Google for Handlebars.js. That should lead you to this website. Go ahead and click on installation, and then click download. Now don't worry, I know what year it is. I know that no one manually downloads packages like this anymore. So later in the video, I'll show you how to use Handlebars with NPM and webpack. But for now, I just want to get you started with the simplest possible setup. So you can focus on understanding Handlebars itself before worrying about workflow. Okay, so once you've downloaded the file, here it is on my computer, you're going to want to move it into your project folder. So here's my project folder. I'm going to drag it into there. And then to stay organized, I'm actually going to move it into a subfolder named JS. All right, and then back in our text editor, within our HTML file, right before the closing body tag, let's go ahead and import or include that JavaScript file. So script source, just point towards it. Handlebars v4. You could just copy and paste the file name instead. That'd probably be much smarter than this. Let's see. All right, so with this file in place, now we can go ahead and create our first Handlebars template. To do that, let's create a brand new script tag. And let's set its type to text/x handlebars template. And then in between the opening and closing script tag, I'm going to drop down to a new line. And this is where we can begin writing our HTML template. Let's start with a simple goal. So if we look at our JSON data, we have an array named pets, and it contains 3 objects. So let's make our first goal to simply output the name of each pet within an h2 heading element. We can go ahead and write standard HTML within this script tag, but we can also use Handlebars specific code. When we want to leverage Handlebars functionality, we open up a double pair of curly brackets. So open, open, and close, close. And in this case, if we want to loop through that array, if we want to loop through this pets array, with Handlebars, it's as simple as typing # each, and then a space, and then the name of an array. So in our case, the name of the array is pets. All right, so that's all it takes to begin an each loop in Handlebars. We also want to be sure to close out that loop. So on a new line, open up a double pair of curly brackets again. And to close the each loop, we just say /each. All right, now between these two lines, we can say exactly what we want to happen for each item in the array. So remember, we just wanted to create an h2 element, and we wanted to include the pet's name here. All right, now if we look at our JSON data really quickly, notice that each pet object has a property of name. And watch how easy it is to access that within Handlebars. We just create a double pair of curly brackets. We want the value of the name property, so we just say name, and we close it out, and that's it. Now we can add more to this template in just a moment, but for now, let's imagine we're happy with the simple template, and we just want to go ahead and actually use it to generate HTML for our page. So to do that, we're going to hop over to our JavaScript file, and within our create HTML function, within the body of the function, we can delete these 2 test lines. And what I'm going to do is create a new variable. I can name it anything I'd like. Let's call it raw template. And what do I want it to equal? Well, I want it to equal the contents of this script tag. I want it to equal this template code. So in order to access this from within our JavaScript, we need to give this script tag a unique ID. So here in the HTML file, let's give this an ID. We can name it whatever we want. Let's call it pets template. All right, and then back in our JavaScript, we know that we can access that by saying document get element by ID pets template. So this will select that element, but then we want to look inside it to find its contents. So to do that, we can tack on a period and say inner HTML. All right, so we have this variable, but really all it contains is this static string of text. Okay, and we need to convert that simple string of text. We need to transform it into a living, breathing Handlebars template that can receive data and generate HTML for us. So what we're going to do is create another variable named compiled template. And what do we want it to equal? Well, we want to leverage the Handlebars package itself. So uppercase H for Handlebars. And it has a method named compile. And we just want to pass it our raw template variable. So raw template. Now things might be confusing at this moment, but I think it will come full circle and make sense right about now. because we're going to create a third variable. Let's name it our generated HTML. And what do we want it to equal? Well, we want to use our compiled template. So we say compiled template, and it's a function. So we just want to pass it our JSON data. So pets data. And now we have a variable, our generated HTML, which hopefully contains 3 H2 elements with the name of each pet. So now all we need to do is add this string of HTML into the empty div on our page. Remember, I have an empty div in the HTML that has an ID of pets container. So back in our JavaScript, let's select that empty div. So I'll say variable pets container. We could have named this variable anything we want, but let's select it by saying document get element by ID pets container. All right, now we can use that variable pets container to select that empty div, and then we just want to adjust its inner HTML and set it to equal our generated HTML variable. All right, now this is a lot of code that we just wrote. There's a lot of moving pieces, so I will explain it one more time in detail in just a moment. But first, let's save this and see if it's working as expected. So let me refresh. Perfect. So we have the heading level 2 elements for purrs loud, barks a lot, and meows a lot. And if we check out the developer tools, here we see the 3 H2s. Beautiful. Now let's go back to our code and let me walk through these steps again super quickly. Big picture, okay? So first we start with this variable, and that's just as simple as selecting this template code. And at this point, this is just a simple string of text. There's nothing magical about it. All right, so then the next step is that we use handlebars to take that simple string of text and create a dynamic flexible template, all right? And it's actually a template function, right? Because then we use it here, and then we just need to populate it with a bit of data. So we're just passing it our JSON data. You could pass it any JSON object you want here. All right, and this handlebars template function will return a string of HTML, which is what we're saving here. And then we just need to add that into the DOM, which is what we're doing here. Okay, so now that we have a general idea of how this works, let's expand our template. Because remember, we don't just want to add the names to the page. If I jump over to the Finished Product tab, you'll remember that we want things to look like this. So let's jump back to our template. And within our each loop, let's delete this heading level 2 and start fresh. So for each pet, let's create a div that has a class of pet. All right, and then remember we want a 2-column layout for each pet. So let's create one div that has a class of photo column. And then underneath that, let's create another div that has a class of info column. All right, and then within the photo column, let's add the image of the pet. So image source equals, and we can leave it blank for now. And if we check out our JSON data, notice that each pet object has a property named photo that is a URL to a JPEG. So to access that, we can just open up a double curly bracket pair and say photo. All right, and then within the info column, let's add back in the heading level 2. So we want to output the name. And then how about we add the species of the pet in parentheses, and maybe in a light gray color and a smaller font size. So I'll create a span and I'll give it a class of species. And then within that, we just want to output parentheses. And then if we look at the JSON, we want this species property. So double curly brackets, species. Let's save this and refresh the page. Looks good. Next, let's output each pet's favorite foods. So if we check our data, we see that there's a property named fav foods, which is an array of different foods. So in our code, underneath the name heading, let's add in an H4 element and give it a class of headline bar. These class names will match up with the CSS that you copied and pasted from earlier in the lesson. And then within this heading level 4, just say favorite foods. And then let's open up an unordered list. And we'll give it a class of favorite foods. This is just for styling purposes. And this is the important part. So within the unordered list, now what we want to do is loop through this array of favorite foods. So to loop through that array, we can just say each, and then the name of the array is fav foods. All right, and then we can close out that each loop. And then within the loop, we want to create a list item element. And now if you look at the JSON data, you might be wondering, how do we access these values because they don't have specific property names? Well, what we do is we can just say this, and Handlebars will know what to do. So let's save this and test it out in the browser. Okay, I see a few things that we can improve. The first is that in this list of favorite foods, we see a strong tag, okay? And that's intended to make this word bold. And that's just coming straight from the JSON data source itself. So in our code, if we use the double curly brackets, the text will be interpreted literally. But if we use triple curly brackets, then the HTML will actually be interpreted as HTML. All right, the next thing that we can improve is in the barks a lot dog example, if we look at the JSON data, he doesn't have a favorite foods array, right? So the two cats have favorite foods, but he doesn't. So if an item doesn't have any favorite foods, it doesn't make sense to output this favorite foods header. Now watch how easy Handlebars makes conditional logic. So we only want to output this content if a favorite foods array exists. So we can just say if fav foods, if it exists, do this. And then we just close out the if statement. And that's it. We're almost done. The only thing left to do now is output the age for each pet. So in our template, in between their name and their favorite foods, let's add a new line. Let's create a paragraph and say age. And if we look at our JSON, we'll notice that there is no age property. Instead, there's a birth year property. And instead of just outputting the birth year, I think it would be useful for our visitors if we did the math for them and told them how old each pet is. Now, a key concept in Handlebars is that you don't perform math or really any advanced operation within the template itself. The template should be very simple. So if we want to use the birth year to calculate the animal's current age, what we can do is hop over to our JavaScript file, and right above our create HTML function, let's create an empty line, and let's create a helper function. So we will begin with Handlebars, uppercase H, and it has a method named register helper. And the first argument is what we want our helper to be named. We could choose any name. Let's call it calculate age. All right, and then the second argument is the actual function itself. So let's add an anonymous function. And then whatever this function returns is the value that will be used in the template. So for example, if we say return testing123, and then back in our template, within our age paragraph, if we say calculate age, which is the name of the helper, if we save this, oh, looks like I have an error. Handlebars is not defined. Oh, I'm sure many of you were screaming at the screen maybe like 5 minutes ago. So when you include handlebars in your HTML, you always want to be sure that you include it before your custom JavaScript. So I'll just move this above this include and then save again. Okay, so now we see age testing123, and we obviously don't want it to actually say testing123. So now we just build out our helper function to calculate the real age. So let's delete this testing line, and let's create a new variable and name it age. And the math here is pretty simple. To find the animal's age, we'll just begin with the current year and then subtract their birth year. So to get the current year in JavaScript, we can say new date, and date has a method named getFullYear. All right, so this is the current year, and then we just want to subtract the animal's birth year. Now, it's important to point out that at the moment, this helper function doesn't have access to the animal's birth year. Within our template, when we call the calculate age helper function, we need to pass it the animal's birth year. So just include a space after the helper name, and then include the property that you want to pass into the helper function. All right, and then in our helper function, within the parentheses, let's add a parameter name. Okay, and now we have access to that within the body of the function. So I'm happy with this math. So I just want to return the value of our age variable. So I can say return age. Let me save my HTML file and refresh. Okay, so I see room for improvement. So age 0 looks very odd, right? That makes it seem like the pet hasn't even been born yet. So age 8 sounds reasonable, and age 4 makes sense. But if the math equals 0, how about instead of actually saying 0, we write out a string that says less than 1 year old. So in our JavaScript, let's delete this line where we return the age, and instead let's begin an if statement, and we'll say if age is greater than 0, return their age plus the phrase years old. But else, otherwise, let's return a string that says less than a year old. Okay, so that way on the front end, it seems less mathematical and more human. Okay, so now the baby kitten, we see age less than a year old, barks a lot is 8 years old, and meows a lot is 4 years old. Perfect. Now that's almost going to bring this video to a close, but we still have one task left. Remember, I promised I would show you how to use handlebars with an NPM and webpack type of setup. Now, if you're not already familiar with webpack and NPM, you can consider this the end of the video. But if you are interested in integrating handlebars with your automated workflow, you'll probably enjoy the next segment. Okay, so behind the scenes, I just removed all of the JavaScript from the page. And now I'm going to walk through my typical handlebars webpack setup. The entire point of this is that it allows you to keep your code much more organized. So the first step is to use npm, and we're going to install 3 packages. Npm install. Obviously, the first package we want is handlebars. The second package is handlebars loader. And the third package is named path. And I'll save these to my package.json file. All right, and then in my text editor, within my webpack config.js file, I'm just going to paste in this code because this is a tutorial on handlebars, not webpack itself. In the description, you can find a link to a GitHub repo where I will include all of this code and all of these files. But long story short, we're just using the handlebars loader, and we're treating our main.js file as the entry point. And we're going to create a bundled version of it named main-bundled. All right, and with this webpack setup, you might be wondering, where does the actual handlebar template code live? Well, instead of adding it to the HTML file like we did before, now we can stay much more organized. So within the JS folder, I will create a new file. I could name this file anything I'd like, but I will call it mytemplate.hbs for handlebars. Let me paste in the template code, right? So this should look familiar. Okay, and then within my main.js file, the file with all of our custom JavaScript, up at the very top, I can just require in or bundle in that template file. So let's create a variable and let's name it mytemplate. And we're just going to require in the HBS file we just created. So it was named mytemplate. And now we can use this variable down within our create.html function. So let's rewrite this really quick. First, we just want to select the empty pets container div that we want to add our HTML to. So we'll call that pets container document get element by ID pets container. Okay, and then we just want to select that variable, so pets container, and we want to adjust its inner HTML. And now watch how easy this is. We can just reuse this variable that contains our template code. We can just say mytemplate, and then we just pass it our JSON data. Pets data. So webpack, and specifically the handlebars loader, will pre-compile the template code for us. All right, and let's not forget about our helper function that calculates the pet's age. If we look back in our webpack config file, we can see that we are looking within a folder named JS helpers. So within our JavaScript folder, I will create a new subfolder. I will name it helpers. And then within that folder, I'll create a new file. I will name it calculateage.js, but you could name it whatever the name of your helper should be. Okay, and then we can just say module exports equals, and then just paste in our helper function, right? So all of this should look familiar. So I'll save this, and I will also save my main JavaScript file. And now if I go to the command line and run webpack, that will create a brand new file named main-bundled.js. And that is the one and only single file I need to include in my HTML. So right before the closing body tag, script source, go into the JS folder and load main-bundled.js. Let's save this and refresh the page. Looks like I have an error. Missing helper calculate age. Okay, so I forgot that when you use the handlebars loader back in our template file, when you actually call your helper function, now that we're using webpack and the module pattern, meaning the code for this helper function lives in its own separate module file, we want to begin this with a $sign. So $sign and then the name of the helper function. So let's save that and rerun webpack. Now if we refresh the page, there we have it. Beautiful. So just to recap, the big advantages of using this type of setup are that you only have to require in one JavaScript file in your HTML, right? So we don't have to manually import the handlebars file. And probably my favorite feature is that now our actual template code can live in its own dedicated file instead of cluttering up the HTML file. All right, and that's going to bring this video to a close. I know this was a long video, so thank you so much for watching it all the way through. I hope you feel like you learned something. And stay tuned for a brand new video next week. Just to give you a hint, we're going to be beginning a brand new WordPress series where we learn about custom post types, custom fields, and a whole bunch of other neat stuff. All right, so until then, take care. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my new premium course where we learn about Git, GitHub, Node, NPM, object-oriented JavaScript, and a bunch of modern tools and best practices that will get you job ready in no time. As always, there's a link to it in the description.